To have beauty, status, wealth. Not fear the execution of the wicked witch, and eventually marry the prince she loves. This is the fate given to princesses. In one city, a girl asked a passerby for directions to her palace. The shopgirl replied that she had to go in the direction of the main road to get out to the palace. This girl seemed to be one of the ones who had come for the princess trial. Her name is Han Molly, and she is a most ordinary clerk. Just over half an hour ago, because of her cycling, she dropped dead in her office. And then, in the afterlife, when she woke up, she saw a cat that greeted her happily. It was a cat in boots. She had been chosen as a participant, the princess game. This game is organized specifically for dead girls. Because she had worked 72 hours without rest or sleep, she had developed acute heart failure, and all she wanted to do was make some money. Now that she had accepted reality, the cat began to explain the rules of the game to her. She must choose one of 7 cards. She would become a princess with the card she chose. She also, like the other 6 princesses, will have 3 years to win the heart of the prince. The woman who marries him will be rewarded with 50 years of life in the real world. Then the girl said indignantly that she wasn't interested in just 50 years of life. She doesn't want to go back at all to work herself to exhaustion again. But the cat hasn't finished talking yet. The winner can also get a bonus of 10 million. After these words, the girl didn't hesitate to draw one card. She drew the Princess Pea card. A beautiful princess that could feel a pea through 20 layers of down featherbeds and flannel. The very princess on the pea. The cat then gave her only 10 seconds to memorize her character's data and abilities. After 10 seconds she would enter the princess game world. In this world, she got soaked in the rain and found herself outside a large palace. If she wants to marry a prince, she first needs to get into the palace according to the storyline. She knocked on the door. She was met by a maid who opened the door for her and immediately realized that she was a princess who had come to see His Royal Highness. Then she asked to follow her. Following her, the girl thought, shouldn't she have first asked her who she was and let her answer? As she walked down the corridor, she noticed a huge painting that was hanging on the wall. The maid said it was a portrait of His Royal Highness, the only prince of this country. A portrait of Prince Vincent. The maid was delighted with His Majesty. She said he was the kindest and handsomest man in the world, and the girl who would marry him would be the happiest girl in the world. His face really is valuable for piquing the interest of the players, but she's not at an age to lose her head over a pretty face. The only thing that makes her heart flutter right now is the money she will receive at the end of the game. Because His Highness is weak and often ill, His Majesty wishes that a new heir be born as soon as possible. That is why the selection of brides is in full swing, and princesses from all over the world are reaching out to them. She had high hopes that someone could melt the prince's heart. As they approached the paper table, the maid gave her a number. She had number 40. This meant that she would have to defeat at least 39 contenders for the title of Queen of this country. The Empire of the Golden Rose is in the east of the continent and is the most powerful and huge. Many smaller Western countries want to increase their power and have sent their princesses here to marry. To choose among the princesses a worthy match for Prince Vincent, the servants have devised a test for this purpose. Whoever passes the test will become the official candidate for consort. The maid asked the princess to wait in the hall. There were so many princesses. It's a shame that they only play roles in the spelled-out story. Only those who know the whole tale could pass the test. And then a princess came into the hall who stood out from all the others. She had blonde hair and a white dress. Rich clothing and a proud personality. it was as if she were the true embodiment of the princess world. When she looked at Han Moli, the girl remembered that all real princesses must curtsy. She was immediately noticed by princesses from other countries. They did not know what country this girl came from. They had never seen her at social events. Though she was in a plain dress, she was very beautiful. She could compete with Her Highness Princess Vivian. The princess was not thrilled to be compared to some simpleton. The girls immediately apologized for this behavior, and said that her kingdom Gordon is the most powerful and prosperous and she is the most noble princess. His Royal Highness and Princess Helen arrived, announced the herald. When they entered the hall, everyone saw that they were even more beautiful than their portraits. When everyone had calmed down, His Highness said, "On this rainy and cold night, you bring spring to this castle. Thank you for coming to meet me from all countries, my dear alternative princesses." All the girls were delighted with his appearance and eloquence. Afterward, he introduced Princess Helena. They met by chance in the woods. She was quiet and did not speak at all. But now she had princess status and would be his alternate princess. He would like to be friends with them all, the prince said smilingly. Han Moli realized that this girl was one of the 7 players in the princess games. She entered the palace first and seized the opportunity. Suddenly a mole on her right finger began to ache. It was her card's ability. When she was in danger, the mole on her right finger got hotter. Indeed, someone in the crowd pushed her to the prince's feet. The guard who was standing near the prince became angry at this disrespectful behavior of the princess. The princess tried to justify that she just wanted to greet the prince. But Princess Vivian stood up for her. She said that the princess was not lying. Han Moli was very surprised that this girl stood up for her, for at first she seemed proud and unfriendly. Then the princess came out to the prince and greeted him. Princess Gordon, Vivian greets His Royal Highness. A true princess is well-bred, has dignity. Unlike poor people who have never seen an aristocrat, the latter will never refuse favor. She told Han Moli with a smirk that she was not used to walking on the marble floor in palaces. Then all the other princesses backed her up. She doesn't even have a maid, her dress is dirty. No wonder she has never been seen in high society, because she is a beggar. As she sat on the floor, she was very uncomfortable with them, alluding to her low status. She could only have been pushed out by Vivian. Han Moli began to make excuses to His Highness that she did it out of respect for him. The guard began to become even more indignant at the young lady. How dare she speak before His Highness? But the prince stopped his guard. She had the king's interest. It was her only chance to save herself, Han Moli decided. His Highness had invited princesses of all nations to choose a consort. He had the intention of establishing good relations with all nations. In her country, to kneel is the highest opportunity to show respect. And his royal guard was ready to publicly execute the princess because of the right of greeting. Would another king now be willing to marry the princess? The guard began to make excuses that he was only worried about his safety. It was strange for the prince to show respect by kneeling. He smiled at the girl and gave her a hand. It was the first time he had ever seen a girl who spoke so beautifully. Still, she was right. He really hoped to take this opportunity to establish friendly relations with all the countries. But the sentinel immediately did the right thing. It is not known what her motives were. Then Helen spoke out in defense of the girl. Your Highness, the guard was right, but the princess was not to blame. Then the prince smiled at her and replied that she knew she would never refuse her requests. And he asked Han Moli to thank his alternate princess. And pronounced his verdict, saying that the girl was innocent. At this, the prince said that he was tired and was going back to the castle. As he was leaving, Han Moli thanked His Highness for forgiving him and Princess Helen. She finally got out of this situation. This game was very dangerous. In the prince's office, the guard was telling the king that he thought Miss Vivian was right. This young lady is a stray tongue, her personality is suspicious, and the prince needs to send her away. Chuckling at him, the prince said that he didn't seem to understand women's hearts. A girl with a sharp tongue is not necessarily hypocritical or not elegant. If he doesn't understand that, they will continue to play their games. Meanwhile, the maid escorted all the princesses into the room and asked them to place their luggage next to the bed, depending on their number. His Highness invited everyone to dinner at the palace. Even though the girls were princesses, they were still surprised by such luxurious beds in this palace. It looks like it was a test for princesses, was just like in fairy tales. Each one had a pea under her mattress. She had to say tomorrow when she woke up that she hadn't slept well. She could definitely pass the test and become an alternate princess. In the evening, the girls had dinner at the restaurant. Coincidentally, she was sitting across from Vivian again. And why did she always like to bully her? She deliberately humiliated her, and when did she have time to cross the road? After eating quickly, Vivian got up and left the hall. Han Moli decided to follow her. Vivian walked down the road that led to the palace. On the way, she was whispering to the maid. Han Moli heard what she was saying to her. She ordered her to put peas under all the mattresses except hers. Vivian seems to know the original tale, too. So why are these two princesses players in her storyline? Vivian wanted to come out the only winner in this test. As Han Moli was peeking at them, she accidentally knocked on the wall. Princess Vivian immediately asked who was watching her. To somehow get out of this situation, Han Moli came out from around the corner as if nothing had happened. She asked Miss Vivian why she was here alone. The maid told her to keep her company. Smiling, she said the palace was in the opposite direction. The castle is so huge, and it's easy to get lost in it. But Princess Vivian knew what she was talking about. So she told her that it was just the two of them here and she could not pretend. Then she went over to Han Moli and told her in her ear. She blundered and got in trouble again. She will be killed for insulting the royal family. In the bedroom, Han Moli lifted her mattress to check for peas underneath. She realized that Vivian had made a deal with the maid and removed the peas from under the other beds. If she gave the right answer without a pea under the bed, the prince would declare that she was a cheat. Still, Vivian was cunning and thought this through well. As she sat thinking about it near the bed, a guard came quietly up behind her. He approached so quietly that she didn't even notice, and grabbing her hand, he asked what she was doing here. He noticed her bad intentions at a glance. He demanded an explanation from her. What she intended to do as she looked under the mattresses. The sentinel immediately discovered that the peas for the test were gone. He suspected her of this. Then she gently took his hands and told him that she wanted to report someone for fraud. She told him that the future of all princesses was at stake. And she asked him to take her to her royal highness. The next morning, a maid came into their room and asked how they slept today. Most of the princesses responded that it was very good. They thanked the king for their hospitality, some even had beautiful dreams. Han Moli answered that the mattresses were very large, soft, and comfortable. But Princess Vivian disagreed with the statement about the comfortable mattresses. She said she had slept very badly last night. Then the maid asked her how that discomfort manifested itself. Vivian replied that she thought something was pressing. After hearing all the answers, the maid announced that the test was over. Then the prince took the floor. The test they were taking tonight was to place a pea under each mattress in their chambers. The girls immediately became alarmed as no one noticed anything. They thought the chambers were quite comfortable. Only those who would have felt discomfort with their delicate skin could pass the test. But then he realized this was wrong. Before they went to bed, he ordered the maid to quickly replace all the mattresses with new ones. This was to bring out the crooks. Last night, he received a report that someone was running a scam. He sent a man to check the mattresses. They found a pea under the mattress of only one princess. She lied that she was uncomfortable sleeping. Isn't that right, Princess Vivian? The prince looked at her contemptuously. What were her goals? All the princesses started discussing her. After replacing the mattress, she said she was uncomfortable sleeping. Obviously she knew the point of the test. Han Moli, who was standing off to the side, thought it was kind of weird. Everything had gone according to her plan, but why didn't the mole alert her to the danger? Last night in the main office she told her that she suspected Princess Vivian's maid of stealing peas from under other mattresses. She heard Vivian tell her maid about it, and a security guard checked for peas under the other mattresses. All of the princess's peas were gone, except for Vivian's mattress. Still, the guard who stood with Han Moli was a little suspicious of her. She looked suspicious to him anyway, and besides, she was accusing Princess Vivian of cheating. Han Moli did not understand this behavior of the guard. But to this the prince only grinned. He said that she really did not look like an ordinary princess. But he could not publicly accuse Vivian of cheating. He asked for some evidence of her guilt. Miss Awan said she had seen the maid's face and could identify her. But after some deliberation, she asked His Highness to remove all the peas from under the mattresses. If after that, in the morning, someone said they had not slept well, she could be accused of cheating. His Highness liked such a suggestion. He ordered the captain to have the maid urgently replace all the mattresses. But Vivian Gui Gordon Princess, even if she turns out to be a fraud, she will be all right. And how would she be held accountable for a false accusation? Then Han Moli slammed the table and walked over to the prince. She said that she never accuses people without grounds. So as a guarantor of her words, she puts her life on the line. If everything she said is a lie, then His Highness can do whatever he sees fit with her. The prince did not expect her to be so sure of her words. Then he stood up and told her that he greatly appreciated her courage and determination. People like her are very rare to find in the palace. He would take this matter very seriously. He hoped she could pass the test. When he left, he called her a special princess. In the Gordon Empire, she was used to the finest silks and the softest beds. That was why she was uncomfortable sleeping. In her excuse, Princess Vivian said. But the captain of the guard didn't care about her excuse. He ordered that this deceiver be detained and thoroughly interrogated. But Vivian did not give up and shouted to the whole hall. Who dares accuse the real princess of deceit? To such words, the guard could answer nothing. Miss Awan knew that she would not give up just like that. Fortunately, she had a witness. She took the maid by the hand and walked with her to the middle of the hall. She turned to His Royal Highness. This is the maid who stole the peas on Vivian's orders last night. She understood that she had no motive to disrupt the test. So she must confess who ordered her to do it, and His Royal Highness will have mercy on her. Your Royal Highness, she hired all those maids. She's the one who stole the peas from under the mattresses. Accused the maid by the guard. Then the prince turned to Miss Vivian. The evidence against her is too obvious. Does she have anything to say in her defense? Miss Vivian said there was too little evidence. Although the maid admitted to stealing the peas, she did not say that it was Vivian who ordered her to do it. Then she turned to the maid. "Miss Maid, did someone order you to steal the peas?" To which the maid replied that no one had ordered her. In other words, she acted of her own accord, didn't she? The maid admitted that she had done everything on her own. Miss Vivian began to scold the maid. How dare she disrupt the princess test? She dared to bring harm to the princess. She must be seized and beheaded. The maid was interceded for by Han Moli. She said that the maid's behavior was very strange, and something was wrong. But no one listened to her, and the warder took her to the dungeon. Why is it like this? Execute the maid without proof. Vivian is also a player. She used her magical powers on her. Suddenly Miss Vivian began to complain about Han Moli. She asked her why she immediately pointed at her after this maid's words. Miss Vivian then turned to His Highness. When he took for granted her words, she felt pain in her heart. She was expressing displeasure in her direction, so she decided to play an unfair game against her. No one but Miss Awan knew it was a lie, and no one knew exactly who was lying. She said that all her excuses were lies. The king did not like the way this situation was developing. Hearing the noise, Princess Helena was walking down the corridor to the chambers where the princess test was taking place. Vivian turned to His Highness with an indignant look. The girl who accused her of cheating is crazy. Wouldn't His Highness do anything to her? At such a question, the king hesitated. Iwan had put her life on the line. She did not panic, but the whole situation was unfavorable for her. The king ordered the guards to seize the girl. The girl began to resist and shouted to be let go. But the guards couldn't do that because it was an order from His Royal Highness. It seems that Vivian wants to try to kill her again. According to the rules of the game, you can eliminate rivals for the prince's heart. There are no alternatives. If only she could be taken out and removed from the game, but right now, the chance of completing the game is 0. While the guards were putting the princess to rest, the commander of the guards turned to His Highness. Your Royal Highness, Miss Awan, cannot stay any longer. What a problem she is. And her behavior is too rude. There's no sense of a real princess here. But there still seemed to be something wrong with her. Although everyone suspected her, and she has many problems, but in the eyes of the public, he must make the right decision. But he senses that this woman, not the type to use dirty tricks. As he was thinking what decision to make, he heard shrieks. Looking in Han Moli's direction, he orders her to let go. But it looked like she was doing just fine on her own. She put one guard on the floor and kicked at him. Holding the guard's hands, Princess Awan turned to His Highness. She had something to say. When the commander saw how she dealt with the guards, he was very surprised by her strength. Your Highness. The girl turned to him. She told him everything she had seen with her own eyes. The maid looked strange. And she had no motive to disrupt the test. If she made a false statement, at the same time she was holding a guard. This did not please the prince very much, and he ordered her to let him go. He would reconsider the situation. The girl thanked His Highness for her sensible decision. But the king added that she would not escape punishment. It was too reckless to identify Princess Vivian without a thorough investigation. As they had agreed last night, why should she not become a maid in the palace as punishment? But even such a punishment the girl was glad of. The longer she was in the palace, the better her chances of becoming a princess remained. Miss Awan thanked the prince for such a mild punishment and bowed to him. The king could not believe his eyes. She did not refuse to become a servant girl. It's fascinating. It seems that his garden has finally undergone a change. The test for princesses in the Rosa Empire has come to an end. Princess Vivian, from the Kingdom of Gordon, because of her restless sleep, was the only one identified as a princess. She was made an alternate princess, and moved into the royal palace. But Han Moli, since she is a princess who has been demoted to the rank of maid. Even though she is from a noble family and became a maid, she will have to work hard. The kitchen, the laundry, the stables, that's her place of work now. It was as if she was back in the life of a perpetual worker. As the head maid was explaining to Han Moli what she would be doing, Princess Helen came into the room. She asked to make Han Moli her personal maid. Princess Helen showed Han Moli her private room as a maid. Although the window was small, she could still see the garden. It was 100 times better than the stables. Han Moli wondered why Miss Helen was helping her. A personal maid is a position offered to girls from a noble family. It is a great opportunity for them to marry a member of the royal family, which means she has added a competitor to the competition. Miss Helen replied that this girl is special. She is a princess like no other. Miss Helen asked her to tell her previous story. Han Moli thought she recognized her as a player. She plays the Swan Princess, after all. A girl has to be careful not to reveal her identity. The best she could come up with was to play dumb. Oh, come on. I'm from a little country you've never heard of. She's no different. Better let her. Tell her the romantic story of meeting His Royal Highness. A few days later, once she became Helen's personal maid, life in the palace became busy and quiet. Miss Awan, aka Princess Helen's personal maid. She should not have to do such hard work in the laundry. The other maids told her. But all was well for Miss Awan. Princess Helen's dress is of a different material, so they must be washed separately and carefully. She is happy to do it. The maids who worked with her were talking among themselves. Miss Awan is so polite and capable. She was a princess, but she has no aristocratic pretensions. Miss Awan quietly continued to do her work when suddenly she heard someone shout. This silk belongs to Princess Helen, how dare you? But Princess Vivian's maids didn't listen to her and pushed her to the ground on top of it. They explained that Princess Vivian was now in high esteem. This color of silk would match the jewelry that the prince gave Princess Vivian. When Miss Awan approached the maid, she began to complain to her. Princess Vivian has gone too far. Not only does she bully the servants, but now she has sent her men to steal Princess Helen's silk. Han Moli said that Miss Helen had told her nothing of the sort. Miss Helen is very kind. She probably didn't want her to worry. A mistress always worries about her subjects. As soon as Vivian became an alternate princess, she started bullying Helen. Is she keeping up with her? She still doesn't know her real identity as a player. In the royal garden, Han Moli tried to find Princess Helen because she asked to find her after she finished her work. It seemed to her that this garden was some kind of maze. When she was already frustrated that she could not find the princess, she heard some sound. She asked loudly if anyone was here. It turned out to be the gardener who was doing his job here. He told her that Miss Helen was near the fountain. But the girl didn't know where the fountain was. She explained to him that she was new here, and could he tell her how to get to the fountain? And then she remembered that the maids had told her there was a guy walking in the garden. It was better not to provoke him. He has the blood of a giant cursed by a witch in him, proof of that, his dark complexion. They say, under the purple flowers in the garden, he keeps dismembered bodies. She even imagined how he does it. But if this guy is dangerous, why doesn't the mark on her arm warn her of the danger? While she was thinking about all this, the man told her that she should go straight ahead, then left behind the Fuji. She would see the third statue, after that she should go right, in the Golden Rose Garden. But even these explanations were not enough for the girl. She still didn't understand where to go. The man saw that she needed help, so he left his work and asked her to follow him. As they walked together through the garden, the girl marveled at the beauty of the Golden Rose Garden. Is the Golden Rose Empire named after him? What wonderful flowers! She wanted to touch them, but the man stopped her. The golden rose is the national flower bred by the royal family. Because of its prickly needles, they call it the merciless flower. It will need special. He wanted to continue the sentence, but the girl started laughing. He's very eloquent when he talks about flowers. He seems to be a good gardener indeed. And then she remembered the time. It turns out she was already late. She said she would find the fountain herself. She thanked him for guiding her. Next time she would be sure to thank him. Having said that, she ran to the princess. This guy was different from the rumors about him in the castle. If she made new friends, it would help the game. When she ran to the fountain, she saw Princess Helen there. Miss Helen was neatly arranging plates on the table. Han Moli said she would get right on it. But Miss Helen said not to bother Miss Awan, she likes to do such things. She invited Vivian over for tea. She asked that Miss Awan help her with that. When the girl found out that Vivian would be here, she immediately said that she didn't set her up on the princess test. Miss Helen believed her that she didn't set anyone up, but Vivian is the favorite now. And she worries that she might hurt her. By this time, Princess Vivian came up to them and asked what they were chatting about, adding that her maid had such a displeased face, and having her around would spoil her mood. As soon as Han Moli saw her face, she immediately wanted to hit her, but she couldn't because she could be punished for it and she wouldn't be able to win 10 million. Miss Helen paid no attention to this behavior, and asked for the tea party to begin. Vivian of course was not happy about this behavior, but since she had princess status, she didn't have to show her real emotions. As they sat down at the table, Miss Helen asked to taste her favorite treat. When Vivian tasted the gingerbread, she all grimaced and expressed displeasure. It was the first time she had ever tasted something so unpalatable. And she threw the gingerbread away. With a proud look she told Helen not to be offended. Her kingdom has great food, and these vile snacks are only good for servants. Miss Awan knew at once that Vivian did not want to be friends with Helen. She had come to offend Helen. And since Han Moli didn't want her mistress to be offended, she approached Vivian and asked, "Does she have something against the Empire of the Golden Rose?" Vivian confusedly replied that of course she didn't mean it. In spite of her excuses, Han Moli continued. Her reaction to this dessert, which is made from the national flower of the Golden Rose Empire. She just said that it is a disgusting dish and only good for hearing. Didn't she humiliate the empire with it? There was nothing to do but take the rest of the food from the maid, who had also taken a small bite of dessert, and eat it herself. Vivian is arrogant, she is too dumb for this world. Miss Awan said as Vivian humiliated the empire, now she needs to eat dessert after the maid, she can do it, right? Vivian glared angrily at the maid and vowed to herself that she would get that humiliation back. During this little conflict, they were approached by the prince, who was pleasantly surprised that his alternate princesses were getting along. The king sat down at the table with the princesses. Princess Helen was very worried about the prince. All sorts of little things should not bother His Highness. Such a strong wind today, so why isn't your highness resting in the palace? Princess Helen asked. The king gently took her hands and replied that they had not seen each other for several days. Did she really want him to leave when he first saw her? The princess was embarrassed by such words, and asked His Highness not to joke like that. Princess Vivian, who was sitting on the other side of the table, thought His Royal Highness didn't want to see her, because he pays all his attention to Princess Helen. Then the prince turned to her. The decoration she received showed his feelings for her. Said the prince, pointing to an earring made of the largest ruby there was in that kingdom. As they sat at the table, the prince noticed a funny oddity. Every time something happens, this girl is always nearby. While they were talking and drinking tea, the commander of the guards came up to them. He had come to tell His Highness something. When Vivian entered the palace, he got 2 alternate princesses. His father was very pleased and he sent them gifts. They were 2 beautiful emeralds, 1 each. In 10 days, there will be a banquet where they will be officially presented as candidates for the title of princess. The people would realize that one of them would soon become their only princess. Princess Helen said she would begin preparations now. And Vivian had only recently bought expensive dresses, so she hoped His Highness would come and personally help her choose one. As they were telling him about their plans, suddenly the prince started coughing. Both princesses immediately ran up to him. But he stopped them and said he was fine, and ordered the captain of the guard to take the necklace to the princess's chambers. And he himself find a maid to help him to the palace. Let Miss Awan guide me, said the king. Han Moli was of course surprised that the king wanted her to escort him. As the 2 of them walked through the golden rose garden, Han Moli would never have thought that being alone with the prince would be so easy. She had a plan to make contact with him. She could accidentally fall on him. She wanted to seduce the prince and then marry him, thereby getting through this game and getting paid. But it wasn't that simple. The prince already has an established opinion of her. After the P test, she would have to be more careful. As they walked down the alley, the prince felt uncomfortable and leaned on Miss Awan. He felt her body tense. He thought she was afraid of him. She has the courage to tell Vivian off, but is she afraid of him? Then she asked if he despised her for hurting Vivian. The prince was not at all unbiased toward her. A cheerful girl like her. Suddenly, out of the blue, the girl took him in her arms. Since His Highness was not feeling well, she decided to carry him to the palace in her arms. She has read so many novels. But she cannot believe that she is to seduce such a fabulous guy. Just thinking about it gives her goosebumps. The prince was surprised by this girl's behavior. He asked her, "Is she really a girl, Miss Awan? She has more power than the guards." The girl replied that it was all for His Highness. Already in the palace, when she brought the prince, the guard was outraged by this behavior of the servant girl. What if she had fallen directly on His Highness? What indecent behavior! He turned to the king. He did not even speak of such behavior for the princess anymore. She is not fit even for the company of a noble lady. To all these comments, the prince asked the captain to keep his voice down because he had a headache. The girl was very upset that she did not look like a princess. To live well in her past life, she did everything. Later, she worked for a company that never cheated on itself. Now, she would try until she won. In the evening at the palace, in her room, Princess Vivian scolded her maid for not telling her that stuffing was the national flower of the empire. The maid confusedly replied that no one knew that. If no one knew it, does that make it a special fact about the world? So Awan is an ordinary girl? She's the princess on the P, and she's taking her place now? Since it already happened, Vivian took pity on her maid and this time she forgave her. But from now on she must be more careful. If she doesn't want to hurt herself. After Miss Awan escorted His Highness into the palace, she returned to her mistress. Miss Helen asked her how His Highness was feeling. As they walked through the garden, he chatted without shutting his mouth the whole way and showered her with compliments. So His Highness was probably fine. Miss Helen calmed down after these words. She thanked Miss Awan for helping her in the garden today. But she must promise not to do such dangerous things again. She and Vivian are direct competitors. And she's just been dragged into this squabble. Miss Awan looked at Helen with a slightly guilty look and thought that by confronting Vivian, she could bring her out in the open and show her for what she really is. Perhaps the golden rose had changed her behavior. Either way, Vivian was the winner of the peak contest. If she plays a regular citizen of this country, it will allow her to avoid the battle for a while. Han Moli smiled at her mistress and said she would take her words seriously. A few days later, the royal tailors picked out the images for the banquet. Miss Helen had to choose a dress she liked. She invited Miss Awan to view the dress with her. She eagerly agreed to such a tempting offer. And so, Miss Awan's day off came, but she wasn't even particularly happy about such days. She simply had nothing to do. She wandered around the garden, scrambling over rocks and reminiscing about her past world. The past world seemed better to her. Eating noodles to another movie seemed so familiar to her. But then her loneliness was interrupted by a maid. She fell to her knees in tears and held a package in her hands. She had been told to give this parcel to the gardener, but she was very afraid. She had heard that the gardener kills people and dries them up as herbariums, and then uses them as ornamental flowers. The only thing he grows is evil. Han Moli saw how frightened this maid was, so she said she would take the bundle to him herself. The maid thanked her, and said she was the bravest of all the women she knew. Finding the gardener, she gave him the bundle. It was fertilizer for the king's flower bed. There are so many strange rumors about him, and he hasn't found contact with any of the maids except her? Han Moli asked. With a bit of a sad face, the guy replied that he doesn't get along with anyone but her. Such an answer was quite honest on his part. Since the girl was bored, she asked what he was doing and if she could help him. Since he helped her last time, now she should help him. He told her that the bag she had brought was a special fertilizer for the golden rose, and it needed to be finished today. He pointed to a huge bed that Han Moli had no idea how to get done in today. But even this amount of work was nothing compared to her job, where she had worked 72 hours without a break. In the process, she learned that his name was Alas. And during the course of their work, they became quite close friends. Meanwhile, at the palace, the commander of the guards was reporting to His Highness. The court tailor had already left as His Highness instructed Miss Helen to choose her dress first. Good. By the way, where is that strange maid? Asked the king to the commander. Though he didn't want to answer, but he had to, he said that this girl was now gardening. Though the king was more or less used to her antics, he couldn't even imagine her doing it. This surprised him so much that he even choked on his tea. In the fitting room, Miss Helen was choosing the prettiest dress she would like. The tailor told her that they were all ready-made banquet dresses for alternative princesses. She just has to choose the dress she likes. After she chooses, he will simply prepare it to fit her figure. There were indeed a great many beautiful and expensive dresses, and at last Miss Helen chose her own dress. The court tailor complimented her on her taste. It was the most expensive dress of all. His Royal Highness provided a batch of the highest quality pearls to make this dress. The tailor needed only to take the measurements of the princess so that it would be ready the next day. As he was taking the measurements from the mistress, she had one request. She asked him to pick out another dress for her. The man was only too happy to help her with that. He noticed that she was always taking care of others, and always treating others to appetizers. He and his wife were big fans of house bags. The girl liked to do it. She had nothing much to do at the palace, so she was often free. An hour later, when Vivian came to the tailor, she immediately began to resent him. Why did she have to choose a dress for the second one? The tailor replied that it was an order from His Highness. As they walked past the tailor, the maid pushed him because she didn't like him standing so close to them, and let him stay out of the way when Miss Vivian chooses her dress. It was no surprise that Vivian liked the dress Miss Helen had chosen, too, and she pointed her finger at it and said she would take that dress. Meanwhile, outside Helen's room, Miss Iwan announced that she was back. But Miss Helen warned her not to come in. She had a present for her. But Iwan had a present for the princess, too. And Miss Helen suggested that they give each other gifts at the same time. The maid gave her a bouquet, beautiful blue lilies from the royal garden. And Miss Helen brought her a new dress. When the maid tried on the new dress, it fit her just right. So how did the mistress know her size? Then she confessed that today she had secretly measured her measurements while she slept. The lilies that Iwan had brought were very pretty, and the princess wanted to put them in a vase. But Han Molly stopped her. The gardener told her that the fragrance of blue lilies is very pleasant and light. It was a variety specially bred for noble women. Iwan took one flower and pinned it on the princess's hair. Miss is always quiet, so she thought this unusual fragrance would suit her. Suddenly Miss Helen's tears began to come. Why was she crying? She apologized to the maid for seeing her bad side. She is crying because she has forgotten the feeling of having friends. To make Miss Helen calm down a bit, the maid asked for her dress. Miss Helen was supposed to be picking out a dress today, so where is it? She replied that she had asked for it to be brought to the room, but it still wasn't here. But the wicked Vivian had already taken the dress to her room, smiling and saying that no one could steal anything from her. And she would be wearing the most gorgeous dress at the banquet. Miss Helen tells us that the court tailor told her that her dress had to be given to Vivian, so he could pick out another outfit for her. But the dress he gave her was too unsightly. The princess said she didn't want to upset him, so she took the dress. But Han Molly still did not understand. If the tailor respected Helen, why did he break his promise? Was Vivian using tricks or magic tricks? Like that time with the maid? Han Moss pondered. Then Miss Helen pinched her maid and told her not to worry about her. She would just wear that dress. Still, Han Molly didn't like her mistress being so soft. This banquet is an opportunity to enlist the support of the nobility and beyond. His Royal Highness will start the banquet with the first dance. If Vivian wins, her credibility in the eyes of the nobility will fall. The banquet is only 2 days away. The dress must be altered. A miss shouldn't give up so easily. Iwan will help her with that. Even though she has to be on her guard with Helen, she still really wants to help her. She's in this world, too. After all, she's the first to lend her a helping hand. 2 days later, the banquet in the Empire of the Golden Rose began, the emperor inviting all the nobility. At this banquet, His Royal Highness must present 2 alternate princesses. Han Moli was tired, with a bouquet of blue lilies running through the garden. If she had more time, she wouldn't have to run around the garden in her dress now. Since no one was in this garden, she decided to pull up her dress so she could run to her destination faster. When she did, she really liked her idea. But suddenly a man came out of the corner. He offered to help her, to show her the shortest way. Miss Awan bowed and thanked the strange man. She was a little embarrassed by her slightly indecent appearance. The man asked her if she knew him. The girl apologized and said she didn't know who he was. But he knows the place well and helped her. He is a very kind man. The girl praised him. She would be embarrassed if she showed her rudeness. The man told her to go behind the corner sculpture, that would be the shortcut. The girl ran down the indicated path, and the man was approached by some military man. "Sir, it's late, has something happened to you?" To which he replied, he just met a very unforgettable person. After a few minutes in the palace, it was time for the prince to introduce his beautiful alternate princesses. Miss Vivian Gordon. Everyone present admired her beautiful gown with pearls. This lady should be the most popular. One lady heard that these treasures were also brought by His Highness, especially for her. Everything went according to her plan. She thought the prince could not resist her beauty. But when Miss Helen came out, all the ladies at the ball looked at her dress with even more excitement. They admired Miss Helen. "Those blue lilies are so elegant." The king, too, was appreciating the reactions of those around him. Vivian seemed crushed by Helen. Helen did a good job, but, he was sure, the most amazing thing was her maid. With the blessing of the emperor, the prince crowned the princesses in front of all the nobility. The princesses were officially announced. Iwan, who clapped in the hall, admired her creation. Even with a spare dress, Helen is not inferior to Vivian. All those days of hard work, it wasn't in vain. It was so hard to sew all those lines on the board. She's very weak at this kind of needlework. Thank goodness Helen is good at sewing. She recalled her unsuccessful attempts to patch a handkerchief. Even so, she would not let Helen sew her handkerchief. Helen is so quiet and capable, she certainly has those who love her left. Right now she has a tremendous chance of winning. And she needs to think about what she should do next. The music played and the ball officially began. The musicians played beautiful melodies that all the guests enjoyed. If the music began to play, it was time to dance. The men began asking the girls to dance. Miss Awan hoped that the prince would dance first with Helen. A man she hadn't noticed accidentally pushed her. And at that moment the mole on her hand let Han Moli know that danger awaited her. Meanwhile, the Emperor of the Golden Rose called his son to him. One of the guests he had not seen for ages. The Duke of the Golden Rose Empire, Erwin, approached them. He said hello to Vincent. The last time they met, he was as short as a cane. Now he would soon be married. To this, Vincent asked him if he had any plans to marry the Duchess. The noble ladies of all the empire would choose him. Who would want to marry an old man like me? Father said he couldn't stand noble ladies, it seems to be true. The emperor asked Erwin. What did he think of these two princesses for Vincent's wife? The man replied that both princesses are beautiful. But he prefers the pretty maid who talks. Now with Princess Helen. Miss Awan was very worried about the princess. Just now she had run into some strange man. Now she is worried about the princess. When the prince learned of the Duke's feelings, he seemed a little sad. But with a smile, he replied that she is a very close friend of Helen's, he cannot take love away from others. Though Erwin replied that he was joking, the prince was still wary. Afterward, he asked his father what he thought of the princesses. One of these princesses would become an empress. It should be a process with appropriate character, elegant manners, and the ability to conquer any country. He has heard of the behavior of princesses in the court. Helen is generous and loving, calm and wise. The king appreciated these qualities. Gems are not a rare treasure. Helen is willing to wear them to the banquet, he thought, and the prince had better pay attention to her. The principal accepted these words. And then it was announced that the introductions were over. Now the prince's first dance must take place. It is a passionate love poem, a beautiful prince and a charming princess, all watching to see who the prince will give his hand. Listening to his father's advice, he walked over to Helen and gave her his hand. They began their beautiful dance. But after a few seconds, the prince noticed that something was wrong with Helen. She was trembling all over. Suddenly the princess fell to the floor. Vincent immediately ordered the court physician to be summoned. Iwan, who ran up to her mistress, checked her breathing. It was steady, but weak. Her birthmark again alerted her to the danger. The danger is right here. It's a blazing pain in the birthmark, and every nerve in her is in tension. Is Helen in such a state because of such a crowd? And then she felt someone running behind her. She turned around and saw a man with a knife running right at Helen. She turned around and grabbed his arm. Unexpectedly, she threw him to the floor and pinned him to the ground. The man began to mutter something. The goddamn Golden Rose Empire apparently will continue to follow you, he shouted in the direction of Helen. Everyone present at the banquet began to whisper amongst themselves. The witch had returned. Han Moli did not understand what they were talking about. After his words, the man died. He had committed suicide. His Royal Highness, with his outstanding talent and charm, calmed the panicked nobles. The banquet was resumed. Han Moli needed to leave with Helen to take care of her. But she was stopped by the prince. She, like a miraculous angel, saved his life. Would she agree to give him his first dance at this banquet? The first dance? Everyone was very interested in the king's choice. Everyone began to discuss Joanna. And to what, another of the chosen princesses? It was the lady who stopped the assassin with her bare hands. No way, how can a princess be so rude? A little embarrassed, she asked him if she could refuse. Her legs were shaky after all that had happened. But the prince said she couldn't refuse. As they danced, Miss Iwan had something to confess to His Highness. She absolutely could not dance. The prince reassured her, and told her to just follow his rhythm. When they danced, and at the same time turned to the other couples to watch how to properly perform the movements. It is necessary to herself from the fact that it constantly stepped on the prince's feet. The prince confessed to her that he had never before met a girl like her. How could she crush a grown man with such clumsy feet? The panic was quickly calmed. The emperor had raised Vincent well, but in the end, he had chosen a lady who had caught his eye as well. Said Erwind to the emperor. The emperor replied that he just hoped his son could find a worthy princess in the country. As the prince danced along with Iwan, she asked him, "Isn't His Highness worried about Miss Helen?" She had suddenly fainted and there had just been an incident of assault. She was worried for her mistress, that she seemed to be in danger again. The prince said that he has the best doctors in the entire empire in his palace. She need not worry about that. Hundreds of noble families were invited to the ball, he could not let them down. As they danced, they accidentally snagged another couple. The prince smiled at the lady, and she was very happy that the prince was paying attention to her. Afterwards they separated and continued their conversation. The prince said that she needed to worry more about him. The target of this assassin she had stopped was the prince. This attempted assassination shows only that the support of the nobles was not lacking here. And a witch is behind this assassination attempt. She is symbols of destruction. Rivers of blood, victims of war. Witches bring misfortune when this horror comes. The prince is the man who must protect the princesses. And she agreed with that it would be difficult for His Highness when such times come. Never, a girl answered. The prince could barely contain his laughter. It seems that with those words he just wanted to make fun of her. Miss Awan was not very pleased with this behavior of the prince. With a displeased face she asked him, did he just try to scare her? To which the prince replied that if she acted as boldly as he did, she might be in danger in this palace. With these words, they had just finished their dance. Meanwhile, Vivian stood back and was angry with her rival. His Highness V eventually chose Joanna. But after all, she is the alternate princess. While she stood pondering, a man approached her. He asked her to dance. But instead of reciprocating, she poured a glass of wine on him. The man didn't want to remain offended either, so he asked her how she, a vile woman, could humiliate the nobility. He invited her in because she was standing there in no mood. She has a very nasty temper. That is why His Highness did not want to dance with her. While this showdown was going on, Miss Awan went out into the palace corridor. Dancing with a prince is a double challenge, both for her body and her soul. She took off her shoes because her feet were very sore. Suddenly the voice of the cat that had met her in the afterlife sounded. He asked to pay attention to all the princess players. It was time to announce the results of the game's progress. Even though the first month of play has come to an end, some players took the necessary steps ahead of time, some were unable to keep up with their progress, but time waits for no one. The complexity of the game is about to increase. They must work hard to reach the high ground and marry a prince. This was her life before she died. She was a wealthy, beautiful woman. When she was still alive, she had a loving fiancé. One day, for her birthday, he gave her a piece of jewelry that she didn't like. She looked contemptuously at the gift and said it was a ridiculous thing. And just because she liked him, she forgave him such a cheap gift. After a while, the guy dumped her and found himself another girl. She didn't understand why he dumped her. He told her he loved her. The guy replied that he was tired of her pretensions and arrogant behavior. His new girlfriend is very gentle and attentive, unlike her. She is the one he is happy with. As she walked up the stairs to them, she began to humiliate the girl who was standing next to her ex-boyfriend. She thought this girl had bewitched him. Well, when she approached, the guy pushed her away. Before she died, all she felt was hatred. And then she woke up. She had another dream about her past life. She decided that she would no longer allow such gentle wenches to take away what was ours. It didn't matter if it was a damn wench or if it was Helen. She certainly won't lose this time. Her magical powers are the most powerful of all. She will surely prevail, and then she will come back and get her revenge on this man. While she was making up her cunning plans, a guard came into Helen's room and handed Miss Awan a gift from His Highness. She thanked him and His Highness. The guard inquired, "How is Miss Helen feeling?" Awan replied that, unfortunately, she was not yet awake. But Helen had a very peaceful night. Perhaps she was just overworked. After listening to the girl, the guard added that His Highness had also given an assignment to bring her, to practice her dancing skills. She had done well yesterday to protect the crown prince. He used to say unpleasant things about her. But after this incident she made him look at her differently. After passing on this message, he said he would be on his way and have her tell Miss Helen to get well soon. Han Moli was very pleased to hear such words from the gatekeeper. It turns out that the head guard is a good man. When he left the room, Iwan approached Helen, who was lying on her bed still awake. The maid was puzzled as to why, even when the court physician said the princess was well, she still would not wake up. She began to ponder the matter. Could there really be a witch involved? She also remembered that the cat had said that the complexity of the game had been increased. She always had a bad feeling. She had to leave the room to figure it out, so when another maid came into the room, Iwan asked the racing one to sit with the princess. She had one person to talk to. She went to the gardener and told him everything that had happened at the ball and that the princess was still not coming around. After he listened to her story, he did not want to tell her about the witch. His birth is considered a witch's curse. The color of his skin tells it. No one would believe his words anyway. But Iwan believed him. He taught her how to garden and always helped her. Suddenly the gardener covered her mouth and told her not to say anything. He noticed that someone in the garden had come to meet her. Peering out from behind the bushes, they saw that it was Miss Vivian and the head gardener. Vivian suggested he talk here because she thought no one was here. The guard asked her to speak quickly. His Highness is waiting for him at the palace. But Vivian replied with a wry smile that the length of their conversation was up to him alone. Apparently, the guard didn't really want to linger with her, so he repeated to her that she should speak quickly. His Highness is waiting for him. He guessed why Miss Vivian turned to him. She wants to win back His Highness's favor. It seems that the event that took place at the banquet has been made known throughout the palace. Unfortunately, he is only a guardian of His Highness and can do nothing to help her. Iwan was very glad that the head guard refused to be a very trustworthy man. But she kept watching them anyway. The golden orb that the princess was carrying with her fell out of her hands, so she asked the guard to help her pick it up. Like a true gentleman, he didn't hesitate to help the princess, but as soon as he touched it, smoke came out of it, and the princess bewitched the sentinel with her charms. He bowed to the princess and gave her the golden ball. That was all Iwan saw with the gardener. The princess ordered the gatekeeper to go to her prince and tell him that Helen. Iwan had not expected this turn of events. She looked very tense, so the gardener asked her if she was all right. She said she was fine. It's just that she finally realized something. Vivian's daughter is not a rival to the princess on the P. She's the princess from the fairy tale Princess the Frog. And this golden orb is her magic power. And the person who picks it up immediately begins to obey her commands. Vivian didn't follow her storyline. She purposely intervened in someone else's. While the other players were replaced, the enemy lurks in the palace and strikes with impunity, and Iwan is the one whose place she has taken. And by staying in the palace, she risks her life. The gardener thought she suspected the princess might be a witch. But Joanna replied that she doubted, so she came to him for help. As soon as she entered the palace, he became her first friend. The gardener replied that she was also his only friend. He told her that the most reliable information about witches can be found in the royal library. First she must find information about the witch, and then she will return to Miss Helen. When she arrived at the royal library, the guard told her that servants are not allowed to enter the royal library. It is reserved exclusively for nobles. She was very upset that she could not get into the library. But suddenly a duke came up behind her. He wanted to help the girl and asked to let them pass together. But even so, and the guard could not let them pass. Even though this maid was with him, he still couldn't let them through. The duke wondered that even with his high position, he couldn't break the rules. Iwan thanked the duke for his help, and was about to leave. But the duke was persistent. He took Iwan by the hand, and they walked together. He led her to some bushes, and went first. The maid who stayed behind asked him what he was doing there. The duke said that when he was a child, there was a secret passage in the wall. Well, and that there were a lot of guards during the day, but you could get through at night when no one was around. As they sat together in the bushes, the duke's servant called him to report that his carriage had arrived. When he approached the duke, he saw, rather absurdly, a picture. The duke and his maid were doing something in the bushes. Meanwhile, the head guard had already arrived at the prince's house. He told him what Vivian had ordered him to do. She ordered him to tell the prince that Helen had helped the assassin who was at the ball. The prince doubted his words. He didn't think Helen was capable of such a thing. But the guard continued to insist on his point. As an example, he cited the fact that Helen had fallen abruptly into a coma after the attack. The prince decided that when Helen wakes up, the guard should bring her to him. He wants to hear what she has to say about it. But Helen is one of his alternate princesses. He hoped that wasn't true. As they were talking, Vivian walked into the room. She turned to His Highness and said that she had overheard them talking about the assassin by accident. She wanted to tell His Highness something about the situation. Meanwhile, the Duke and the maid walked out to the carriage. The Duke thanked Miss Awan for a great time. Thanks to her, he remembered his childhood years spent in this palace. And Awan thanked him for telling her about the secret passage. In addition, he gave her his personal seal. If she would like to know more about the palace, she should feel free to write directly to him. Iwan timidly asked the Duke why he was so helpful and caring about her. When he climbed into the carriage, he replied that the Duke's life was very boring. Because of his surroundings, he only had this sullen fellow, who, to top it off, was unhappy with the Duke's behavior because if they didn't leave now, he would have to spend the night in the carriage. Miss Awan is an interesting young lady, and he wants to help her to make things work out for her. This palace is full of all kinds of desires and dangers. He didn't want it all to destroy her. He stroked her head and said he would look forward to their next meeting. When Awan returned to her mistress's room, Miss Helen was already awake. The princess asked the other maid to leave the room so that she and Awan could be alone. When the maid left, Awan sat down on the bed with the princess. After a moment, Miss Helen threw herself into the maid's arms. She did not know what to do. She had no one else to tell but her. As she hugged her, she was trembling all over. The princess told her that she could not touch men. She had once been brutally beaten. If she resisted, she was beaten even harder. She could not even lift her head to look him in the eye. That's why she was afraid to date men. When a man touches her, she trembles and cannot breathe. His Highness is very gentle with her, so she can hold his hand, but as they danced, she realized she was scared and she couldn't help herself. She was still very scared. At this time, a lot of thoughts flashed through Han Moli's mind. Was she lying to her? She wondered this question, probably an infinite number of times. But when she looked into her eyes, she realized that the princess was not lying to her. She took the princess by the arms and told her not to be afraid. She is a princess, no one would dare intimidate her. As soon as Helen calmed down, the guards entered the room. They announced that His Highness had issued an order concerning the princess. After checking on the mercenary sent by the witch, they determined that only a nobleman could have helped him sneak into the ball. Miss Helen's fainting and the assassin's attack. These two events occurred simultaneously and are suspicious, until the case is solved to forbid Helen to leave the palace and forbid anyone to visit her. Yvonne began at once to defend her mistress. She wanted to say that Miss Helen had fainted because... But she was stopped by Helen. She didn't want His Highness to know about it. The head guard intervened in their conversation. Frankly, if it weren't for His Royal Highness, her punishment would have been much harsher, even though she's an alternate princess. This time Vivian struck a powerful blow. She didn't expect the Empire to be so terrified of the witch. She is serious about getting rid of Helen. After that day, Vivian became the only alternate princess close to the prince. The whole palace noticed that she and the prince became very close. Helen, on the other hand, waited for the prince every day. To be more informed about the witch and to save her mistress, Yvonne sneaked into the royal library at night through the passage the Duke showed her. To stop Vivian, she must find records that show that Vivian's magic is connected to the witch. Vivian is also a player and her magic is very powerful. In the library, she finds a book about the wars of the Empire. The witch has enough magical powers to harm people. For 49 years in the Empire, all corners of the continent have been discovered. As she was reading the book, she heard some rustling. Turning back and dedicating the flashlight, she spotted a cat. She did not understand what he was doing here. This code looked like the cat that got her into the game. Yes, that's how it is, she recognized him. Unexpectedly for her, he dropped the book. The girl didn't understand why he had done it. But then she remembered his words. He had said that the difficulty of the game had been increased. He had personally come to complicate it himself. After he dropped the book, he disappeared. Hearing the noise in the library, one of the guards came quietly up behind her and ordered her to follow him. To prevent her from escaping, he drew his sword. The guard led her to the prince. He was dressed all in black. The guards left the prince alone with the maid to talk. The prince wanted an explanation as to why she was here. The girl timidly replied that she was just reading a book. Servants are forbidden to enter, so she came at night. When she looked at the prince, she became frightened. She had never seen him with that look on his face. And also her mole on his finger alerted her that something was amiss here. Slowly and confidently, the prince approached Yvonne. He had always appreciated her. But now it seemed to the girl that he wanted to kill her. She tried to run away, but the prince took her by the arm and toppled her to the floor. He took her by the throat and began to choke her. She is a special flower, a pity it is revealed when it is not needed at all. Lying on the floor, the girl found that His Highness is not sick and weak at all. She has a sharp mind and excellent skills. He thought of transferring her to the guard, but now she has no chance. He said goodbye to her and began to squeeze her neck even more. At this moment, Han Moli flashed back to her past life. All the employees in her company discussed only her. She didn't have the personality and experience to build a career. Her boss only hired her because of her pretty face. Otherwise, how would she have gotten the job at their company? But then, she got a chance to go back and change everything. She didn't want to miss it for anything. Out of the last of her strength, she shouted that she knew who the witch was. At the same moment, the prince let her go, and ordered her to speak. She asked him, did he suspect that someone in the nobility had colluded with the witch and sent an assassin? The noble coats of arms and expensive cloths from different parts of the empire of those two suggest that they are noble gentlemen from different parts of the empire. She thought His Highness had locked up Miss Helen to secretly investigate with the nobility. But the prince was mistaken, and the witch was inside the palace, not outside. He agreed with her, and added that this information was not worth her life. Then she said that she had seen you the witch's magic, but she had no proof. If the prince gives her a chance, she can provide the evidence, Ms. Awand said confidently. 10 days. The prince gave her 10 days to provide proof that the witch was in the palace. The girl had to remember that her life was still at stake. The girl was very short of 10 days, so she asked to be given a month. But the prince was firm, he didn't want to give her more than 10 days. Only a little while ago she was trembling with fear. But now she was no longer afraid to tear up with him. The princess replied that she had begged him then, afraid that he would kill her, but now it was different. Without her, it would be problematic for His Highness to find a witch in the palace in a short time. After she said this, the principal asked her to come over and help him put on his cloak. Ms. Yuana turned to the prince. Can he keep surveillance on her, and then can he forgive her? She asked. The prince replied that he doesn't like to lead a surveillance on someone. Leaning towards her, he said that he gives her 10 days and another one. After that, the prince turned around and went to his chambers. Han Moli wanted to clarify some information and asked His Highness if she needed information about the witch. Promptly, the prince replied that he would give her access to the library. The girl had one more question for the prince. Could she take the book to her room? To which the prince replied that she had already taken one to her book. Compared to that gentle prince before, he is a completely different person now. He looks like a poisonous snake that is ready to inject venom at any second. But that seems to be his true face. And so in her room, Miss Jana began to read a book. In the 49th year of the Golden Rose Empire, witches began to appear in every corner of the mainland. People began to suffer. For many years, the witches did atrocities. They caused floods, drought, and famine. In the 52nd year, the Emperor of the Golden Empire, William Rosecat, personally led the troops. The war against the witches lasted for 3 whole years. The witches were finally crushed. And the mainland returned to stability again. But the witch who survived hid in the crowd, spreading terror and darkness. It is the 75th year of the imperial calendar, and it was the current emperor who crushed the witch. Behind the assassin is a witch who seeks revenge against the empire. Vivian doesn't seem to be connected to the witch in any way. Han Mali kept reading. Maybe she belongs to some category of witch. What about the other princesses then? And what about her herself? Pondered the girl. As the prince was walking to his room, a servant came running up to him. He told him that Miss Vivian had sent him to him. She said it was a beautiful moon today, and she would like to take a walk with him in the garden. The prince didn't even answer anything yet, but the servant fell over in horror. The prince asked him what was wrong with him, but he didn't even say anything yet. The prince turned to him. The servant asked His Highness, is he in a bad mood? The prince's face immediately changed. He apologized to the servant for scaring him. He was just thinking about other things, he was very tired today. Taking off his cloak, he gave it to the servant and asked him to give it to Vivian. It was going to be cold this night and he wouldn't be by her side, he had to send this cloak earlier, but hoped she would like it. Accepting his cloak, the servant said Miss would treasure it very much. Giving the cloak to the servant, the prince said he would hope for it very much. The next morning all the maids were busy with very important business. They were packing luggage, packing dishes. When Miss Yuana came out of her room, she asked one of the maids, Was His Highness going somewhere? The maid said that His Highness was going on a sea cruise in 3 days. Miss Vivian would be going with His Highness. They will spend several days and nights on a huge ship on the high seas. The maidservant found it very romantic. But suddenly, the maid apologized to Miss Yuan. She had forgotten that her mistress, Miss Helen, had fallen into disgrace. Miss Yuan calmed her down and said it was all right. But she was thinking of something else entirely. She needs to get Vivian out, and he's only given her 10 days. And now this rascal is trying to take away her chances. After a while, we see Han Moli climbing through the window into Helen's room. The princess was very surprised at this appearance of her maid. She asked Miss Yuan not to enter through the window again as it was dangerous. But she began to be reassured by her maid. She was locked in this room. Only the person bringing her food can enter her chambers. She doesn't have to worry about her since her room is right next to hers. Then Han Moli saw the sheets that had fallen near the princess. She picked them up and started reading. It was a letter from her brother. It said that her 5 brothers were the injured ones. The older brothers were desperate to save them, but they lacked funds. They asked for alms from His Highness, the Prince of the Golden Rose Empire. Helen was very upset as she was now under suspicion and could not go near His Highness. Han Moli remembered the original fairy tale and asked Miss Helen, what is her relationship with her brothers? The princess revealed that her brothers were cursed and turned into swans. Before moving to the palace, she lived with her brothers. She must help them. Miss Yuan informed Helen that His Royal Highness was going abroad by sea. If she sailed too, she could ask for His Highness's help. But Miss Helen sadly replied that she could not even leave the room. To help her mistress, Miss Yuan came to His Highness. She asked him to take Miss Helen and her on a sea voyage. But the king suspected that she was keeping something from him. So he asked her not to hesitate, for it was just the 2 of them in the room. Miss Awana thanked His Highness for his frankness and said that she too would speak frankly. She needs to prove the identity of the witch. She can't investigate if he is going to travel with Vivian. Since she is Miss Helen's maid, she hasn't noticed strange about her. Anything is possible because the witch is closer than His Highness thinks. The prince understood Awana's hint. He realized she was talking about Vivian. If she didn't suspect Vivian, she would have no reason to sail the sea with him, the prince replied. So he allowed her to join Helen on the voyage with them. The girl was very glad, and ran at once to Miss Helen to please her with this information. But she was stopped by the prince. He asked her to change the water in all the flowers in his room. As he has. There are no maids available at the moment, so she must do it. Han Moli immediately set about the job as her future life depended on it. On the seashore, we see a beautiful woman walking along the shore. The servant behind her asked her. Her beauty could be compared to the most beautiful waves on the sea. But why is she so obsessed with that man? The girl replied that she wanted to be free as a bird. 3 days later, the ship moved out of the harbor. Since Helen was still in disgrace, the prince didn't make much preparation for her departure. Helen was only allowed to take Yuan Na as her maid. That was the end of all her privileges. When they went into their room, they were not happy. The room was perfectly situated next to her mistress. She set about unpacking her luggage first. Miss Helen apologized to Joanna for not being able to do anything without her help. Miss Jana asked her to take advantage of this trip to get closer to His Highness. She was sure he would not refuse her request to help her brothers. These words greatly encouraged Miss Helen, so she would try her best. The next day, she and Helen wanted to go to see His Highness, but they were stopped by Miss Vivian's maid. She said that she and the prince were having a tea party right now, so they should leave. Another day later, They wanted to approach His Highness again, but this time they were stopped by some servant. He said that His Highness and Miss Vivian were admiring the scenery. The prince noticed that something was happening on the deck and wanted to find out what it was. But Vivian turned to him and said it was nothing important, it looked like just a couple of noisy people. She wanted to divert his attention from the commotion, so she showed him the emerald ring he had sent her yesterday. She wanted to brag about how beautiful it was on her hand. The prince replied that the ring was nothing compared to her beauty. Kissing her hand, he said she was beautiful, so much like a witch. The girl loved that his creature was wooing her like that. His compliments are always very sophisticated. The gifts he sent her are insanely expensive. According to these gestures of love, marrying him would be easy, Vivian thought. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Highland's ship appeared. The squadron commander ordered all his servants to line up quickly. This noise was noticed by Miss Helena and her maid, who were sitting in their room. They did not realize what was going on up there on the deck. On the deck of the prince's ship, Princess Charlotte of Highland was dumbfounded. The prince turned to her. They were to meet in her country in 3 days, so what had brought her here so early? She replied that instead of tedious waiting, she preferred to take the initiative. In honor of the princess's arrival, the prince threw a festive dinner. Inviting Princess Helen and Vivian, he introduced Miss Charlotte to them. She represents Highland and is traveling to their country as an ally. He also introduced Miss Charlotte to his 2 candidates for his princesses, Helen and Vivian. She praised the 2 princesses. Charlotte said that they are very beautiful and His Highness is very lucky to have such beautiful wives. Their beauty even makes her feel insecure. If they call her the pearl of the sea, how can she be insecure about her beauty? Asked the prince to her. Moving closer to him, the girl said that His Highness is very handsome. He should be very careful or she would fall in love with him. This behavior made Miss Vivian very angry. Pulling back, Charlotte apologized to Vivian. She said that she was just joking and not to let Vivian get mad at her. That I'm about Miss Helen. Owana thought Charlotte was a new player, judging by Vivian's reaction. And then suddenly Miss Helen turned to His Highness. She hadn't seen him for so long, she wanted to tell him about her brothers and that they needed help. But no one expected this turn of events. Charlotte threw herself into the prince's arms with the excuse that there was something horrible on her plate. Vivian, Owana and Helen were not happy about this behavior of the new princess. The prince ordered a servant to get the plate shards away from Charlotte. Owana volunteered to help Charlotte. Charlotte was afraid that Miss Helen would not appreciate such an act by her maid. But the prince reassured her, saying that Helen was not that kind of person. This was confirmed by Helen herself. She said she didn't mind. The main thing was that she should be all right. As Joanna approached Charlotte, she noticed that the hem of Miss Charlotte's dress was dirty. She wanted to help her with it. Luckily, there weren't many grease stains on the dress. With the help of white vinegar, she cleaned it up quickly. Charlotte praised the maid. Turning to the prince, she said he was in no danger with such maids. When she finished wiping, there was not a trace left on her dress. But white vinegar has a peculiar odor and overpowers the scent of perfume. So she wanted to escort her so she could change. Charlotte wanted to have a word with the prince before she left. But to her efforts to stay with him longer, he replied that Miss Owana would take her to the dressing room. Seeing Miss Charlotte off, Owana was surprised. The prince seemed to understand her motive, but instead of thwarting her, he helped her. She had managed to get Charlotte away. She hoped Helen could seize the opportunity. When Helen returned to the room, Owana began to question her. The princess told her that His Highness was willing to give His Majesty, the Emperor, a request to help her country, but he couldn't guarantee that the Emperor would agree. Since the Emperor suspects her of helping the assassins sent by the Manhwa to sneak into the castle. At this time, Vivian came in to see them. She turned to Helen. She needed to speak to her privately, so she asked that her maid leave the room. Anyway, Gordon's kingdom could be of help to her country as well, Vivian told her. But in return, she wanted Helen to help her get rid of Charlotte. Helen thought she wanted to kill her. To get Helen to be more serious, Vivian approached her directly. She doesn't need to play the naive fool anymore, they're players. Charlotte is a strong opponent. Even if she's not a player, this is the best opportunity to take her out before she strengthens her position. But Helen didn't want to do that. She was willing to do her another favor, but she didn't want to hurt others. She didn't want to hurt people. Vivian was not satisfied with this answer from Helen. She shouldn't be naive. Vivian decided to tell her how she had taken out the real princess on the pea. Helen was very surprised, for she thought Vivian was the princess on the pea. As she left, she said that the best choice in this situation for her was to cooperate. She should think about her proposal. To celebrate the alliance between the two countries, the prince held a dance aboard the ship. The speaker was Miss Charlotte, who had a beautiful voice that everyone loved. Prince liked her voice so much that he called her singing legendary. But Miss Charlotte noticed that Vivian didn't seem to like her singing at all. But smiling to herself, she replied that her singing was incredible. Suddenly, everyone noticed some strange woman. They thought it was Helen, but suddenly she pulled out a saber and pointed it at the prince. Here we see the events that took place half an hour ago. A servant knocked on Helen's room. The door was opened by Miss Awana because Miss Helen was resting, and she asked the servant to keep his voice down. He said that His Highness, to celebrate the alliance between the countries, would have a dance on the deck, and he called Miss Helen. The girl said she would pass these words on to her mistress. Closing the doors, Han Moli pondered. Vivian now saw a rival in Charlotte and would do something about it. But Helen had refused to help Vivian, and she could learn nothing. She is not surprised that Helen refused her. After all, she is a very kind person. Then Awana decided for herself that only she would be able to do something about it. We now return to the present. When the guards saw her pointing her sword at His Highness, they wanted to stop her, but the prince saw nothing wrong with it. He asked the guards to calm down, for he was sure Helen had no malicious intent. Unexpectedly, the girl began to dance, waving her sword. After the dance was over, she walked up to Her Highness and gave him a yellow rose. She congratulated His Highness and Highland on the formation of the alliance. Everyone else stood by the side and was very surprised. It was the first time they had seen the ball dance. They thought Miss Helen was very beautiful. The principal thanked Helen for her congratulations. She could always surprise him. This evening her dance and rose had exceeded his expectations. Turning to her, he said he was a little tired tonight, and he wouldn't mind if she accompanied him. Walking right up to her, he told her in her ear that she'd better do as he said, because he recognized it was Miss Awana. And the two of them set off away from everyone. At this time Vivian and Charlotte were left alone. The new princess turned to Vivian. She saw that Miss Vivian was very displeased. It seemed she didn't expect that Miss Helen had a trick up her sleeve. Time was very angry with Helen. She wondered if she had turned her down, but could she stand firm without her help? As she thought, she was too naive. She was firmly determined to make sure none of them left the ship alive. Meanwhile, the prince along with the Yuan had reached to the bow of the ship. He turned to her and told her she could take off her mask. There is no one here. Taking off the mask, she asked the prince. How did he recognize her? He told her that Helen would never have done such a thing and never fought like that. Even though she was an alternate princess, she very rarely showed him love. Han Mali asked him if he had called her here to persuade Miss Helen to take the initiative. But without answering her question, he gave her a rope and asked her to pull on it. He originally wanted to give it to the most beautiful princess at tonight's party. Well, alas, they got a strong competitor. She could count herself lucky tonight. After pulling the rope, she saw a beautiful sight. She saw flying fish. It was just unbelievable. While Yuan Na was admiring the sight, the prince told her that to do this, you just need to use a bait for this fish and it will swim into the net by itself. And then pulled a special mechanism and the fish would jump out by itself. Iwana was displeased with the prince's behavior. He spoiled the whole romantic moment. But the prince said he didn't need romantic tricks to win the maid's heart. Her 10 days are about to end. She needs to figure out how to save her life. Despite such words from the prince, the girl was still grateful to him. If she didn't find the witch and/or be killed by her, that's the most beautiful thing that she had seen before she died. After that, she changed into her maid outfit and approached Vivian. This girl was getting pretty fed up with Vivian, so if she didn't have anything important, then let them leave, Vivian said unhappily. The maid said that Miss Helen asked her to tell her that she wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be able to come to see her. If Miss Helen is seasick, Vivian offered to give her medicine. Inside the ship, when the medicines she accidentally dropped them, and ordered the maid to collect everything. What had fallen to the floor? As Yuan Na was picking up the medicine, she thought it was strange. Suddenly, as she was picking it up, she saw a golden orb. Han Molly realized that she wanted to subdue it with her magic. Miss Vivian hurried the maid away. Couldn't she just pick up the medicine? Han Molly needed to distract her, so she stood up and said she'd been distracted by the guards. She was glad her Miss Vivian had shared her medicine with Miss Helen. She added afterward. So the guards wouldn't notice her magic, she'd kicked them out. And when she turned around, Miss Yuan Na kneeling gave her her golden orb. She waited for her orders. With a smirk, Miss Vivian gave her the box she was to take to Charlotte's room. Taking the box, Ms. Iwana went to her room. When she got to her room, she thought, why carry this box to Charlotte's room? Vivian is a princess from the fairy tale, the prince is a frog. According to the original story, the frog takes the balloon and returns it to the princess. Magic will definitely work on the frog, thought Han Molly as she took her rival's balloon. Shaking the box, the girl saw the emblem of the royal family on the bottom of the box. The sound in the box is as if there is a snake in there. It seems that Vivian wants to kill Charlotte with a poisonous snake. And thanks to this box, she'll blame her and Helen. So she can get rid of two rivals at once. Because she changed into Helen, it made Vivian make a move. She needed to finish all of this within 3 days. The next morning, she was cleaning Helen's room when she came in from her walk. And she asked her animatedly if she'd met the prince today. When she closed the door hard, she wasn't herself. She began to complain that she had said she didn't want to be involved in intrigue. Why did she pretend to be her and go to fight for the prince's attention? As she slept last night, she heard the rustling of clothes as she left. But she didn't think she was going to the prince. Today, everyone is gossiping that she was the center of attention yesterday, putting Vivian under her belt. She didn't want to go head-to-head for her goal. Jana couldn't tell Helen her intentions, but she couldn't lie to her for her own good either. She asked to be excused. Walking over to Yuan Na, Helen said that she was the only person she trusted here. She would find a way to help her brothers, but from now on she asked the Yuan Na not to act so rashly. Helen's tears and hugs seemed to envelope her. The embrace of the mistress was felt by Yuan Na. At this time, in the prince's chambers, he was sitting with Vivian and drinking morning tea. Vivian was in a very good mood today. Did something good happen to her? Asked the prince to her. The girl answered that she had heard that there was a sea snake in the sea. The longer it is hungry, the stronger its poison. Even a grown man would die in a matter of minutes. The man was a little surprised that she was interested in such things. But since she was interested, when they arrived at the palace, he promised to send her the books. She thanked the prince, but she was just afraid that this snake might be on the ship and bite her. Suddenly, the door opened and Princess Charlotte walked in. She immediately turned to Vivian. If she was interested, she could tell her about the scenery of her country. When Vivian saw her, she was puzzled. Seeing such a perplexed look on Vivian's face, Charlotte thought she didn't want her here. Charlotte didn't understand why this girl was still alive. Had her magic not worked? Or had something happened to the sea serpent? All wilted, she left her resting place at the prince's side. When she came out, Charlotte sat in the prince's arms. She asked him, "Does Miss Vivian already know that he is going to announce her as another alternate princess?" She would hate to compete with Sister Vivian. Everyone admires His Highness so much. As he approached the girl, the prince said that if he got her love, he would be the happiest man on earth. It was almost time for a kiss, but at the last moment, the prince turned away. He ordered the guards to prepare the documents. The Golden Rose Empire would sign an agreement with the Highland Kingdom, and Charlotte would become its official alternate princess. Meanwhile, Vivian had already found Miss Helen's maid. She stacked the girl against the wall and asked her why she didn't do what she ordered. And she told her that yesterday she came to her senses and realized that she was standing in front of Miss Charlotte's room with a wooden box in her hands. She was so frightened that she dropped it and a snake crawled out of it. The sea snake crawled away into the sea, but she saw that the box still had traces of her nail polish on it. Vivian didn't understand why Ioana hadn't followed her orders. Had there been inaccuracies in yesterday's order that she had come to her senses in front of Charlotte's room? Vivian thought Una didn't know she had magic. In a gruff voice, she asked if she had told anyone about it. Una replied that she was just an ordinary servant, who would she tell it to? If she wanted to survive, she should keep her mouth shut. 2 days from now at midnight, she must wait for her on the deck, along with the box. Vivian could only use magic once every 3 days. Looks like she can't even rely on her own magic anymore. So she'd have to solve all the problems herself. The next day, Charlotte was announced as the alternate princess. 2 days later, Ewan waited for Vivian on the deck. And when Vivian approached her, she asked her to hand her a box, and as if by accident dropped her golden ball. Of course she asked the maid to pick it up for her. The prince was watching from the window. It seems Han Molly had arranged for him to see Vivian using magic beforehand. Sitting by the window with a mug of tea, he read the note. "Miss Vivian and I will meet for me to deliver to her the evidence that proves her involvement in the attempt on the lives of the other princesses. We're meeting on the back deck at midnight tonight. I'll have evidence pointing to the witch. Please be there." Witch or not, Vivian tried to kill Charlotte. But the Gordon Kingdom is not weak, and to accuse Vivian you need hard evidence, pondered the prince, watching what was happening through the window. Ioana, who was about to take the golden orb, thought to herself. If the magic didn't work the first time, she would probably try to kill her now. The mole on her arm was already slowly heating up. After the hypnosis, it'll be like a blur. Now you can risk your life. With these words, she touched the balloon. The guards who stood with the prince saw her magic. Is Princess Vivian a witch? Had she been in the palace all this time? They began to whisper amongst themselves. But the prince told them all to be quiet. He stared at what was about to happen. Last time her magic didn't work, by chance. She was sorry she couldn't take out Helen and Charlotte with one blow. But taking out the main obstacle wasn't bad either. Vivian spoke. She ordered Ioana to jump into the sea. since she was by the actions of Vivian's magic. She gladly obeyed her order. To prevent the death of the girl in principle, with the guards ran out on deck. They overturned the Vivian, and the prince ran to rescue Awana. Already being underwater, the girl regained consciousness. She realized that she was now in the sea, so the Vivian had made her jump here. She hoped that His Highness had fully seen everything. If this was her fate, then she should accept it. But the prince jumped into the water after her and saved her. She was already thought to be in the other world, but after His Highness's barbed reply, she realized that she wasn't dead. If he saved seriously, then did he see everything Vivian did? Awana asked him as well. The prince said she'd done a great job. Tomorrow, he would tell Helen that he would let her be his. Before he could say anything, a strong wave came over the ship and His Highness disappeared.